All the world is made of faith, trust, and pixie dust. Hey, Brian Miller here, and thanks so much for tuning into this week's episode of Thursday Thoughts, all about the role of trust in a constantly changing world. I've been thinking a lot about trust lately. Does our ability to trust decline with life experience? Do circumstances like the 2020 pandemic make us more cynical? Do we use different criteria for trusting people versus institutions? How has the digital landscape shaped or changed our ability to trust one another? The bulk of this week's Thursday Thoughts is a direct, unedited excerpt from my book, 3 New People. Afterwards, I'll sketch some new, unfinished thoughts about trust, and I'd love to hear your take on this, so be sure to leave comments or send me a message via any method you like. Email, LinkedIn, Instagram, wherever. All of those resources are in the description as well. So here's an excerpt from chapter 14 of 3 New People. This is a section entitled People Who Aren't Interested. But Brian, some people just aren't interested in connecting. I can't tell you how many times I've received that comment, tweet, or email since my TEDx talk launched. My response is this. The TEDx talk's title is How to Magically Connect with Anyone, not How to Magically Connect with Everyone. Connection is a two-way street. It is a mutually beneficial exchange of emotional data. No matter how good your intentions are or how well you learn, hone, and implement the techniques in this book, some people just aren't going to be open to connecting with you. And that's okay. Michael Jordan didn't win every game. Steve Jobs didn't nail every product. Antenagate, anyone? You will not connect with every person you try to connect with. The very best you can do is put all of yourself into the world. With each person, every day, give your very best effort to build a connection. If your best effort is rejected, then there's nothing to be upset about. That person simply wasn't for you, or you weren't for them, or both. It's not a quantity game. There's no scorecard that keeps track of how many people you made a meaningful connection with. The number doesn't matter. It's the quality of the relationships with the people you have connected with that matter. What you might be concerned about is the breakdown of relationships with people who were willing to connect with you. So what do we do when connections break down? Whether digital or in person, miscommunications affect relationships differently depending on the strength and history of the relationship. A single language-based misunderstanding between Lindsay, my wife, and myself is not going to break our relationship, no matter how frustrated I get over her pronunciation of crayon as cran. Our relationship has built up enough trust to survive that. Even so, small missteps can build up over time. Like cracks in a sidewalk, they can eventually break down even the strongest of relationships if you're not careful. On the other hand, a seemingly silly or insignificant misunderstanding can absolutely take down a new relationship. Have you ever made a joke with a new group of friends or colleagues only to have it met with dead silence? You find yourself wondering if it offended them, if they didn't get it, or if they simply didn't find it funny. Speaking of Lindsay, my wife, here's something that happened to me just a few months ago. Of course, a few months ago when I was writing this book, so it's a few years ago now. During a stage magic show at a college campus theater of about 100 students and their families, I invited a girl up on stage to assist with a trick. I take great care of my volunteers, refusing to make fun of them or put them in embarrassing situations. As we've discussed, it takes great courage to volunteer for a magic show, and I do my best to treat people with respect in that vulnerable situation. This girl was a freshman in college. I thanked her for volunteering and asked for her name. She said, Lindsay. I instinctively responded, "That's my wife's name." The audience audibly and visibly turned on me, and it completely took me by surprise. It was a full 3 seconds of silence before I realized what had happened. Nobody in the audience knew that I was married and that my wife's name is Lindsay. From their perspective, it looked like I was hitting on an 18-year-old girl with an old-fashioned and wildly inappropriate pickup attempt. The second I realized the misunderstanding, I started waving my left hand around. No, I'm married, I exclaimed, frantically pointing to my wedding band. My wife's name is actually Lindsay. I tried to salvage the moment by finding common ground with her. Do you spell it with an A or an E? I asked. An E, she responded. Yeah, so does she. She always has trouble finding it spelled the right way on souvenirs. The girl chuckled and she said she did too. I went on with the trick and the rest of the show went fine. But the spell had been broken. The first 10 minutes of the show until that incident had been raucous and energetic, and in the 50 minutes after it happened, I never fully reconnected with the audience. It was an honest and innocent misunderstanding, but it happened so early in our relationship that the audience didn't have enough history or trust built up with me to stay connected. So, should you try to reconnect if a relationship breaks down? Well, it depends on your history and the circumstances. As a performer with another 50 minutes of contracted stage time, I had no choice but to try to reconnect and build the relationship back up. If you suffer the breakdown of a relationship with a colleague or boss, and the success of your career depends on your ability to work well as a team, then it's probably a good idea to make every attempt to reconnect. If it happens in your personal life, you'll have to weigh the potential outcomes of trying to reconnect. Not all relationships are meant to be or meant to last. Human connections are only healthy when both sides are emotionally invested in each other's well-being. Sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself and others when a connection breaks down is to leave it alone. Cherish the connection you had and learn from the breakdown. There's always a lesson, and there is always room for improvement. In fact, my biggest, most regrettable failures in human connection led to this book. A lot has changed in the 2 years since I published 3 New People. I spoke on 5 continents, I bought a house, I launched a podcast, I built online courses, I made personal connections with some of my heroes. I finished and released a rock opera because, why not at this point, right? We entered a global pandemic, watched the entire live event industry collapse with no recovery in sight. And in just 2 months, Lindsay and I are going to welcome our firstborn, a baby boy, into the world. Many of these changes are positive and wonderful, and of course, some are not. One leap I've not been willing to make is TikTok. Despite the fact that Gary Vee's been shouting it from the rooftops, and many of my close friends and colleagues have repeatedly insisted I would kill it on the platform, whatever that means. I can't bring myself to do it. Why? Because I don't trust it. Now, before you start shouting at me, I totally get it. TikTok is arguably no different than any other social media app, or any app for that matter, that we already have on our phone. Smartphones aren't safe. Apps aren't trustworthy, and no matter how many privacy controls we are ostensibly given as the end user, the fact is simple. These apps exist for the sole purpose of taking our data. We are not the product, we are the consumer. So how come I've stuck with Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube through all of their very real data breaches, but I can't bring myself to jump on TikTok? Trust, as I mentioned in the book, is directly related to the length and strength of a relationship. The length and strength of a relationship. Have you ever looked up a new local restaurant, immediately read a couple of 1-star reviews, and just decided against it? Of course you have. So have I. Now look up your favorite local restaurant, the one you swear by and recommend to all your friends and family, or bar or pub or whatever you're into. Do they have 1-star reviews? I bet they do. What's your reaction to those? If you're like me, your reaction is, I bet those people are just being picky or difficult, or they're lying, or maybe conspiracy, right? That's probably a competitor's restaurant trying to sabotage our favorite place. We hold people in establishments we have a longer, deeper relationship with to very different standards than newcomers. If you went to your favorite local restaurant and something went wrong, say the meal was undercooked or the server wasn't on the ball that night, would you write off the restaurant? Probably not. You'd excuse it as an anomaly. But if that same undercooked meal or poor service occurred at a place you're trying for the first time, go get the manager. We're never coming back here again. So, new app, old hat. TikTok is a relative newcomer in the world of social media apps. Facebook has been dogged by privacy concerns and data breaches, but I've been using Facebook since my freshman year of college when you still needed a .edu email address to sign up for an account. That's length And it's the hub of my entire personal network. That's strength. So for me, Facebook has length and strength, but TikTok has neither. And for that reason alone, I can't look past the data breaches and the frequent privacy concerns that constantly make headlines. Is it irrational? A double standard? Yeah, probably. But we are all subject to cognitive biases, and the most successful businesses are those who understand their customers' or clients' biases rather than pretend they don't exist. So let me ask you, what is it that your customer, client, employees, or even friends, family, and community need to feel a deep sense of trust with you? Implement practices and organize a culture around that answer, and you'll have raving fans in no time. This week on the Beyond Networking podcast, I had the true pleasure of sitting down with cybersecurity expert Dominic Vogel. If you think cybersecurity is dull or boring, you haven't met Dom. He is an absolute riot, and we probably laughed more and harder than I ever have during a podcast interview. The last season or two, because I actually want to learn about your story here in real time and ask the questions that a person would ask if they were discovering that, and not just the ones that fit the narrative of the podcast. So I hope that's cool with you.
Absolutely. I mean, I did zero prep too, Brian, for being honest. So it's all.
Well, there we go. There we go. We are both completely unprepared.
This has epic written all over it.
I think the title of this episode is going to be "Fake It Till You Make It." Imagine you were at a cocktail party or these days a virtual networking event, and someone comes to you cold, has never met you before, and they just say, "Hey, what do you do?" What's your answer these days?
Cyber risk leadership for small and mid-sized businesses.
Wow, that wasn't an elevator pitch. That was I don't know what that was. That was a "you're walking past me" pitch, and I want to get him. I'm gonna get him on the sidewalk.
Holding the door open, or as the elevator door is closing. Give someone a compliment. I love when people pump up my ego. Someone says, "Hey, saw your video. It's fantastic." Frick, I'll give you 50 minutes of my time just because you said you like my content. We discussed cyber risk, of course. The key insight here is that cybersecurity is all about building a trusting relationship with your employees, customers, and clients. But my favorite part of the conversation was our deep dive into the right and wrong ways to approach networking and how to continue making new, meaningful connections in a virtual world. There's lots of tips for leveraging LinkedIn as a networking platform and how to reach out cold to someone new without coming across as spammy or salesy. Check it out at the link in the description or right here, or on your favorite podcast streaming app if you prefer the audio-only version. That said, thanks so much for sticking with me. My name is Brian Miller, and always remember, our world is a shared experience. Every interaction is meaningful, and every person you meet, even virtually, is important. And we'll see you soon.